Aliens left a broken warship behind. Now it's humanity's ultimate weapon. Part 1. The wreckage in the dark. The mining ship Horizon's Edge was doing its normal work near Neptune when everything changed. Captain Linda Moore had been in space for 30 years. She had seen many strange things floating in the darkness. But nothing had prepared her for what her sensors found that day. Deep inside the ice of a small moon, something huge was buried. Something that was not natural. Something that was not human. Linda ordered her crew to get closer. The ship moved slowly toward the moon, and as they got near, the shape became clear on their screens. It was a spaceship, but it was like nothing humans had ever built. The thing was almost 3 kilometers long, bigger than any vessel Earth had ever made. Its metal skin was covered with strange marks and burns from weapons that no human had ever seen. Kyle Patterson was the ship's engineer. He was a quiet man who liked to solve problems. When he saw the scans, his hands started shaking. This was not just any wreck. This was a warship. And whoever had built it was not from Earth. The crew landed on the moon's surface and walked toward the buried giant. The ice cracked under their feet as they moved. When they finally reached the ship, they found a hole in its side, torn open by some ancient battle. They went inside. The corridors were dark and cold. Strange symbols covered the walls, written in a language that made no sense. The air had been gone for a very long time, maybe thousands of years. Whatever had happened here, it had happened long before humans had even learned to use fire. Linda touched the wall and felt the smooth metal under her glove. Someone had built this. Someone with knowledge far beyond anything on Earth. And now that someone was gone, leaving only this broken shell behind. When they returned to Earth, Linda reported everything to the United Earth Council. The leaders met in secret, afraid of what this discovery meant. If aliens existed and if they built warships, then the universe was not the peaceful place humans had hoped it would be. The council made a decision. They would study the wreck. They would learn its secrets. And they would make it work again. Admiral Grace Howard was chosen to lead the project. She was known for being smart and brave, the kind of leader who could handle impossible tasks. She gathered the best minds from every country on Earth. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, and pilots all came together for one purpose. They called it Project Rebirth. Dr. Nathan Cole was one of the first to join. He had spent his whole life studying how to make ships go faster. But when he saw the alien propulsion system, he realized that everything he knew was like a child's drawing compared to a masterpiece. The aliens had built engines that could bend space itself, making distances that should take thousands of years pass in moments. Commander Diane Walsh came next. She was the best pilot in the Earth fleet, with nerves made of steel and reflexes that seemed almost supernatural. Her job would be to learn how to fly the alien ship, to make its strange controls respond to human hands. For 5 years, they worked in secret. A station was built in orbit around Neptune's moon, hidden from the rest of humanity. Thousands of workers spent their days inside the ancient vessel, slowly bringing it back to life. The challenges were enormous. The alien technology was so advanced that even understanding it took years. The power systems used energy in ways that human science could not explain. The weapons were terrifying, capable of destroying entire cities with a single shot. The shields could stop anything that Earth had ever built. But the humans did not give up. Step by step, they learned. They made mistakes and fixed them. They found solutions that the aliens had never imagined. Combining human creativity with alien power. Dr. Cole made the most important discovery. Deep in the heart of the ship, he found a crystal that glowed with soft blue light. When he ran his tests, he could not believe the results. This single crystal produced more energy than every power plant on Earth combined. He called it the heart, and he knew that it was the key to everything. With the heart working properly, the ship came alive. Lights flickered on in corridors that had been dark for ages. Screens displayed information in the alien language, which the scientists slowly learned to read. The engines hummed with power that made the whole vessel vibrate. Admiral Howard walked through the restored ship and felt tears in her eyes. They had done it. They had taken something broken and dead and made it whole again. But more than that, they had given humanity a chance. She knew what was coming. The universe was not empty. There were others out there, beings who built warships and fought wars among the stars. Someday, those beings might come to Earth. And when they did, humanity needed to be ready. The ship was given a new name. They called it the Valiant because it would carry human courage into the unknown darkness of space. Human interfaces were added to the alien systems, making it possible for Earth crews to operate everything. Quarters were built for the men and women who would live aboard. A bridge was constructed where Admiral Howard would command. On the day of the launch, the crew stood at attention as Admiral Howard gave her speech. She told them that they were about to do something no human had ever done. They were going to take humanity's first true step into the galaxy. They would face dangers that no one could predict, but they would face them together as representatives of their entire species. Commander Walsh took her seat at the pilot's station. Her hands moved over the controls that she had practiced with for years. Dr. Cole monitored the heart from his science station, watching its gentle pulse with something like love. Lieutenant Marcus Bell sat at the weapons console, hoping he would never have to use it, but ready if he did. The Valiant rose from the secret station and turned toward the stars. Its engines glowed with power that bent the laws of physics. In front of it, space itself began to twist and fold, and then, in a flash of light, the ship was gone. Humanity's ultimate weapon had begun its journey. Nothing would ever be the same again. Aliens left a broken warship behind. Now it's humanity's ultimate weapon part 2. First contact gone wrong, the Valiant traveled through folded space like a needle through cloth. One moment they were near Neptune, and the next moment they were somewhere else entirely. Stars that had been distant points of light were now close enough to touch. Commander Diane Walsh gripped her controls and let. Out of breath, she did not know she had been holding. They had arrived at a star system called Kepler 442. Scientists on Earth had detected strange signals coming from this place. Patterns that could not be natural. Admiral Grace Howard had chosen it as their first destination, hoping to find answers about who had built the Valiant and what had happened to them. Ensign Patricia Lane sat at the communications station, scanning every frequency for signs of life. She was young, barely 25, but she had a gift for languages and patterns that made her perfect for this job. Her screens filled with data as the ship's sensors reached out into the void. What they found made everyone on the bridge go silent. Ships floated in the darkness around a broken planet. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all destroyed in some terrible battle. Their hulls were torn open, their weapons cold and dead, and they all looked familiar. They looked like the Valiant. Dr. Nathan Cole ran his scans and confirmed what everyone already knew. These were sister ships to the Valiant, built by the same hands, powered by the same technology. An entire fleet had gathered here and died. Whatever had killed them had been powerful beyond imagination. Admiral Howard ordered the ship to move closer. She needed to understand what had happened here. She needed to know what enemy could destroy so many advanced warships. But before they could investigate, Ensign Lane shouted a warning. 3 ships had appeared from behind the largest moon. They were different from the wrecks, angular and aggressive, covered with weapons that were already beginning to glow with power. They moved fast, spreading out to surround the Valiant. Admiral Howard tried to communicate. She ordered Ensign Lane to broadcast on every frequency, sending messages of peace in every language and format they could imagine. She hoped that whoever these beings were, they would at least try to talk before fighting. The answer came in the form of weapons fire. The first shots hit the Valiant's shields with enough force to shake the entire ship. Lights flickered on the bridge, and alarms began screaming. Lieutenant Marcus Bell responded without waiting for orders, his hands flying across the weapons console as he returned fire. The Valiant's weapons were unlike anything humans had ever built. Beams of energy that could cut through metal like paper. Missiles that tracked their targets with perfect accuracy. Marcus had trained for this moment, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of using such power. His first shot hit one of the enemy ships in its center. The vessel broke apart in a flash of light, its crew dying in an instant. Marcus felt sick, but he did not stop. 2 more enemies were still attacking, and the Valiant was in danger. Commander Walsh flew the ship with skill that amazed everyone watching. She spun the massive vessel like it weighed nothing, dodging weapons fire that should have been impossible to avoid. The Valiant moved through space like a dancer, graceful and deadly at the same time. The remaining 2 enemy ships tried to flank them, coming at the Valiant from different directions at once. It was a smart tactic that would have worked against any human vessel. But the Valiant was not human, and Diane Walsh was no ordinary pilot. She pulled the ship into a maneuver that bent the laws of physics. For a moment, the Valiant seemed to exist in 2 places at once, its weapons pointing at both enemies simultaneously. Marcus fired both arrays at the same instant. Both ships exploded. The battle was over in less than 5 minutes. Admiral Howard stood in the silence that followed, her mind racing. These beings had not tried to communicate. They had not sent warnings or demands. They had simply attacked the moment they saw the Valiant. Why? Dr. Cole offered an answer. He had been studying the wreckage around them, comparing the designs of the destroyed ships to the enemies they had just fought. The sister ships were old, destroyed perhaps centuries ago. But the attackers were new, their technology modern and well-maintained. He believed that the builders of the Valiant had been at war with these beings. A terrible war that had ended in the destruction of an entire fleet. When the enemy saw the Valiant, restored and flying again, they had reacted with fear and hatred. They had attacked because they thought their ancient enemy had returned. Ensign Lane found something in the wreckage that supported this theory. A data core from one of the destroyed sister ships, still partially functional. She downloaded its contents and began trying to decode the alien language. What she found was a warning, a message recorded in the final moments before the ship died. The aliens who had built the Valiant called themselves the Ardani. They had been peaceful once, until a great empire called the Dominion had begun conquering the galaxy. The Ardani had built warships to defend themselves and their neighbors. But it had not been enough. The recording ended with a plea. If anyone found this message, they should know that the Dominion was evil. They would not stop until they controlled everything. The only hope was to fight, to resist, to never give up. Admiral Howard listened to the message 3 times. Then she ordered the Valiant to return home. They found what they were looking for, even if it was not what they had hoped. The galaxy was not peaceful. An enemy existed that had destroyed entire civilizations. And now that enemy knew that someone had restored an Ardani warship, war was coming. The only question was whether humanity would be ready. As the Valiant jumped back toward Earth, everyone aboard understood that their lives had changed forever. They were no longer explorers on a journey of discovery. They were soldiers in a war that had started long before humans had even left their planet. And somehow, against all odds, they would have to win. Aliens left a broken warship behind. Now it's humanity's ultimate weapon. Part 3. The Coalition. The Coalition, the Kaolm warship behind. Now it's humanity's ultimate weapon. Part 3. The Coalition. The aliens left a broken warship behind. News from the Valiant spread through Earth like fire. Aliens were real. They had empires and wars and weapons that made human technology look like toys. And worst of all, one of those empires had already marked humanity as an enemy. The United Earth Council argued for weeks about what to do. Some leaders wanted to hide. They said humanity should turn off all signals, stay quiet, and hope the Dominion never found Earth. Others wanted to build more ships, to prepare for a war that might come at any moment. Admiral Grace Howard had a different idea. She stood before the council and made her case. Hiding would not work forever. The Dominion was too powerful, too determined to conquer everything. But if enemies existed in the galaxy, then friends might exist too. The Ardani had built warships to defend their neighbors. That meant there were neighbors who needed defending. Humanity should go out and find them. They should build an alliance. Together, they might have a chance. The council voted and Admiral Howard won. The Valiant would return to space, not to fight but to make friends. Over the following months, the Valiant traveled to dozens of star systems. Each jump took them further from home, deeper into a galaxy that was stranger than anyone had imagined. And everywhere they went, they found species who lived in fear. The first allies they found were the Volari. These beings looked like walking trees, with bark-like skin and leaves that glowed with different colors when they communicated. They had once lived on a beautiful world covered in forests. But the Dominion had wanted their resources and had burned their planet to ash. Now the Volari were refugees, scattered across a handful of colony ships, always running, always afraid. When the Valiant appeared, they thought their end had finally come. An Ardani warship could only mean more destruction, but Admiral Howard surprised them. She spoke of Earth, a world that had known nothing of the galaxy until recently. She spoke of humanity, a species that had found the Valiant by accident and restored it through determination and hard work. And she offered something the Volari had not expected: friendship. The Volari leaders were suspicious at first. Why would anyone help them? What did humans want in return? Admiral Howard gave them an honest answer. Humanity wanted to survive. The Dominion would come for Earth eventually. The only hope was to stand together. It took time, but the Volari agreed to join. They did not have many ships, but they had knowledge. They had been traveling the galaxy for generations and knew things about the Dominion that humans needed to learn. The next allies were the Toreth Collective, beings who had linked their minds together through technology. They thought as one, a network of consciousness spread across thousands of individuals. The Dominion considered them dangerous because they could not be controlled through fear. A Toreth who died simply rejoined the network, their memories and experiences preserved forever. The Toreth were interested in humans for a different reason. They had never encountered a species quite like humanity before. Individual minds that chose to work together without being connected. Creativity that emerged from chaos rather than order. They found humans fascinating and agreed to join the alliance in exchange for cultural exchange. More species followed. The Krell, massive beings who lived in the clouds of gas giant planets. The Sithani, small and quick, with technology that could hide entire fleets from sensors. The Morven, warriors who had fought the Dominion for centuries and never surrendered, even when they had no hope of winning. Each species brought something valuable. The Krell understood material science in ways that improved the Valiant's armor. The Sithani helped develop new stealth systems. The Morven taught tactics that have been tested in actual combat against Dominion forces. But the most important discovery came from Dr. Nathan Cole, who had been studying every piece of Ardane history he could find. He learned the truth about the people who had built the Valiant. The Ardani had been scientists and artists, not warriors. They had created beautiful things and shared their knowledge freely with anyone who asked. When the Dominion had begun its conquests, the Ardani had tried to negotiate. They had offered technology and resources in exchange for peace. The Dominion had responded by destroying their first colony, then their second, then their third. Only then had the Ardani understood that some enemies could not be reasoned with. They had built their warships in desperation, pouring all their knowledge into weapons they had never wanted to create. For a while, they had held the Dominion back, but they were too few, and the Dominion was too many. One by one, their ships had fallen. The last of them had been destroyed at Kepler 442, the graveyard the Valiant had found. But before they died, the Ardani had done something remarkable. They had hidden copies of their technology in secret locations across the galaxy. They had hoped that someone would find these gifts and use them to continue the fight. The Valiant had been one of these gifts. And now humanity had made it into something the Ardani could never have imagined. A symbol of hope for an entire alliance. Admiral Howard called the alliance the Coalition of Free Worlds. Representatives from each species gathered on a station built in neutral space, far from any Dominion territory. They signed agreements to defend each other, to share technology, and to never surrender. Commander Diane Walsh trained pilots from a dozen species, teaching them tactics that combined human creativity with Ardani technology. Lieutenant Marcus Bell worked with alien weapons specialists to develop new defenses. Ensign Patricia Lane learned to communicate in languages that no human had ever spoken before. When the Coalition formally announced its existence, the Dominion responded with rage. They broadcast threats across the galaxy, promising destruction for anyone who stood against them. They assembled a battle fleet and sent it toward the nearest Coalition world. Admiral Howard received the message and made her decision. The time for diplomacy was over. The time for hiding was past. The Coalition would meet the Dominion in open battle, and they would show the galaxy that tyrants could be defeated. The Valiant's engines powered up. The Coalition fleet gathered around her, and together they flew toward the first great battle for the freedom of the galaxy. Aliens left a broken warship behind. Now it's humanity's ultimate weapon. Part 4. The Battle of Horizon's Gate. The Dominion fleet arrived at the planet called Sanctuary with murder in their hearts. 37 warships surrounded the small world, their weapons charging for an attack that would kill millions. The Valari refugees who lived there had nowhere to run. After years of fleeing, they had finally found a home. Now, that home was about to be destroyed. The Dominion commander was named Krath. He was old and cruel, a veteran of 100 conquests. He had burned worlds and enslaved species. To him, the Valari were insects, and the Coalition was a joke. A handful of weak races led by primitives who had stumbled upon technology. They did not deserve. KR-8 gave the order to begin the bombardment. His weapons officers started the firing sequence. In moments, the surface of Sanctuary would be turned to glass. Then the Valiant appeared. The great ship dropped out of folded space directly between the Dominion fleet and the planet. Her shields blazed with power. Her weapons were already charging. And behind her came the Coalition fleet. Dozens of ships from a dozen species, all of them ready to fight. Admiral Grace Howard stood on the bridge of the Valiant and broadcast a single message. She told Krath that Sanctuary was under Coalition protection. She warned him that any attack would be answered with force. She gave him one chance to withdraw. Krath laughed. His response was a volley of weapons fire that lit up space like a second. Sun. The battle began. The Valiants. Shields absorbed the first strikes without breaking. Dr. Nathan Cole watched his monitors as the heart pulsed faster, feeding power to the defensive systems. The crystal had never been pushed this hard before. He did not know how long it could last. Commander Diane Walsh threw the ship into motion, dodging between enemy vessels with movements that seemed impossible for something so large. She had become one with the Valiant over the past year, learning to feel its systems as extensions of her own body. When she moved, the ship moved. When she thought, the ship responded. Lieutenant Marcus Bell began firing. The Valiant's weapons tore through Dominion shields like they were made of paper. The first enemy ship exploded in a ball of fire. Then the second. Then the third. But there were too many of them, and the Valiant could not be everywhere at once. The Coalition fleet spread out to engage. Valari cruisers, each one carrying the last survivors of their species, flew toward the enemy with weapons blazing. They knew they might die, but they would not let Sanctuary burn without a fight. The Torith collective ships moved in perfect coordination, their linked minds working as one to find weaknesses in the Dominion formation. Krath watched the battle with growing rage. This was not how it was supposed to go. The Coalition should have been easy to destroy. Instead, his ships were dying one by one, and the primitive humans were making him look like a fool. He ordered his fleet to focus all fire on the Valiant. If they could destroy the flagship, the rest of the Coalition would fall apart. Dozens of weapons locked onto the great ship. Beams of energy and waves of missiles converged from every direction. The Valiant shuddered under the assault, her shields flickering as they struggled to absorb the damage. Admiral Howard gripped her command chair and refused to show fear. Her crew was counting on her. The Coalition was counting on her. She would not let them down. Dr. Cole shouted a warning. The heart was overheating. If they did not reduce power consumption, it might burn out entirely. Without the heart, the Valiant would be just another ship, easily destroyed by the Dominion fleet. Admiral Howard made a decision. She ordered all power diverted to weapons and engines. The shields would have to wait. They were going to attack. Commander Walsh understood immediately. She turned the Valiant toward the heart of the Dominion formation, toward Krath's flagship. If they could kill the commander, the enemy fleet might lose its coordination. The Valiant accelerated to speeds that made the stars blur. Enemy weapons struck her hull, burning through armor that had protected the ship for centuries. Crew members died at their stations, but others took their places without hesitation. Lieutenant Bell locked onto Krath's flagship and fired everything the Valiant had. The main batteries released beams of energy that could crack moons. The missile bays emptied in a single massive volley. The alien weapons that humans had spent years learning to control unleashed their full fury. Krath's flagship tried to evade, but it was too slow. The first hits destroyed its shields. The second hits tore through its hull. The third hits reached its power core. The explosion was bright enough to be seen from Sanctuary surface. With their commander dead, the Dominion fleet fell into confusion. Ships that had been coordinating their attacks now fired randomly, sometimes hitting each other. Coalition forces pressed their advantage, destroying enemies that no longer knew how to fight back. The battle raged for 6 more hours. When it finally ended, only 3 Dominion ships remained. They fled into folded space, running back to report the impossible news. The Coalition had won. Admiral Howard looked at the damage reports and felt her heart sink. Nearly half the Coalition fleet had been destroyed. Thousands of brave beings from a dozen species had given their lives. The Valiant herself was scarred and bleeding, her hull torn in 100 places, but Sanctuary still lived. The Valari refugees watched the sky and wept with joy. For the first time in generations, someone had stood up for them. Someone had protected them. They were no longer alone. Admiral Howard broadcast a message to the surviving fleet. Her voice was tired but strong. She spoke of the sacrifice and courage she had witnessed. She honored the dead and praised the living. And she made a promise. This was only the beginning. The Dominion would not accept defeat. They would return with more ships, more weapons, more hatred. But the Coalition would be ready. They would grow stronger. They would find more allies. And they would fight until the galaxy was free. Across Coalition space, Her message was heard. On 100 worlds, beings who had lived in fear allowed themselves to hope. The Dominion could be beaten. The tyrants could fall. And at the heart of this new hope stood humanity, a young species that had refused to give up. The Battle of Horizons Gate was over. The war for freedom had just begun. Aliens left a broken warship behind. Now it's humanity's ultimate weapon. Part 5. The Final Stand. The Dominion had ruled the galaxy through fear for 1,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of worlds and enslaved billions of beings. No one had ever truly challenged them. No one had ever made them afraid. Until now. The defeat at Horizon's Gate sent shockwaves through the Dominion Empire. How had this happened? How had a collection of refugees and primitives destroyed one of their greatest fleets? The Dominion leaders demanded answers, and when they learned the truth, they were filled with rage. Humanity, a species that had crawled out of the darkness only decades ago. A species that had stolen our Dani technology and dared to use it against its betters. They had united the weak and given hope to the hopeless. They had become the soul of the coalition. The Dominion understood what needed to happen. Destroy the humans and the coalition would crumble. Break Earth and hope would die forever. They gathered every ship they could spare. 200 warships, the largest fleet ever assembled in Dominion history. They stripped their borders and emptied their stations. Nothing would be held back. This would be the end of humanity. Admiral Grace Howard received reports from coalition spies as the fleet assembled. She watched the numbers grow day by day, week by week. When the final count arrived, she sat alone in her quarters for an hour before speaking to anyone. Then she called her senior officers together and told them the truth. The Dominion was coming for Earth. They would arrive with overwhelming force. The coalition fleet was still rebuilding from Horizon's Gate and could not match those numbers. But Admiral Howard had a plan. Dr. Nathan Cole had discovered something during his endless studies of the heart. The crystal could do more than power the Valiant. It could generate a field that would disrupt enemy jump drives across an entire star system. Any ship caught within that field would be trapped, unable to escape until the battle was decided. If they activated this field when the Dominion arrived, the enemy would have no retreat. They would have to fight to the death, with no possibility of running when things went wrong. It was a gamble. If the coalition lost, they would lose everything. But if they won, the Dominion fleet would be completely destroyed. Admiral Howard made her decision. They would stand at Earth and fight. The coalition fleet gathered in Earth's solar system. Ships came from every member species, each one carrying warriors who knew they might not survive. The Valari sent every vessel they had, repaying the debt from Sanctuary. The Torath Collective linked their minds across thousands of ships, creating a network of consciousness dedicated to victory. The Morven brought their ancient warships, scarred by centuries of resistance, and at the center of them all stood the Valiant, repaired and ready. A human crew determined to protect their home. The Dominion fleet arrived like a storm. 200 ships dropped out of folded space at the edge of the solar system, their weapons already charging. The sight of them blotted out the stars, a wave of destruction that seemed unstoppable. Their commander broadcast a message to Earth. He promised that the planet would burn. He promised that every human would die screaming. He promised that the coalition would learn what happened to those who defied the Dominion. Admiral Howard did not bother to respond. Instead, she gave Dr. Cole the order. The heart pulsed with blinding light. A wave of energy spread outward from the Valiant, passing through every ship in the system. The Dominion fleet tried to activate their jump drives, preparing to retreat if needed. Nothing happened. They were trapped. The battle for Earth began. Commander Diane Walsh flew the Valiant like she had never flown before. She pushed the ship beyond every limit. engaging multiple enemies at once while weaving through walls of weapons fire. She had spent years becoming one with this vessel, and now she proved that no other pilot in the galaxy could match her. Lieutenant Marcus Bell coordinated fire with the entire Coalition fleet. His voice rang across 100 communication channels, calling out targets and timing attacks. He had started this journey as a weapons officer who hoped he would never have to kill. Now, he was a commander of warriors, fighting to save his world. Ensign Patricia Lane managed communications that spanned dozens of species and languages. She translated orders in real time, keeping the Coalition coordinated even as chaos erupted around them. Without her, the fleet would have fallen apart in minutes. Dr. Cole monitored the heart as it burned hotter than ever before. The crystal was doing things it had never done, powering weapons and shields and the disruption field all at once. He whispered to it like a friend, begging it to hold together just a little longer. Admiral Howard commanded from the center of the storm. She moved pieces across a board that spanned millions of kilometers, sending ships where they were needed, pulling back forces that were in danger. She had trained her whole life for this moment, and she would not fail. The battle lasted 3 days. The Dominion fought with desperate fury, but they were not used to enemies who would not run. Every time they tried to retreat, the disruption field held them in place. Every time they thought they had won, Coalition reinforcements appeared. They were fighting an alliance of free peoples, beings who had chosen to stand together, and that choice gave them strength beyond their numbers. On the second day, a Torath squadron destroyed the Dominion command ship. The enemy fleet lost its coordination, and individual captains began making their own decisions. Some tried to surrender. Others fought even harder. The battle became 1,000 smaller battles, each one desperate and deadly. On the third day, the last Dominion ships finally fell. The great fleet that had come to destroy humanity was gone, scattered across Earth's solar system as wreckage and ash. Admiral Howard stood on the bridge of the Valiant and looked out at the stars. Earth still turned below, blue and green and alive. Her crew was exhausted, wounded, some of them dying. But they had won. She broadcast a message to the Coalition fleet. Her voice was hoarse from 3 days of shouting orders, but every word was clear. She spoke of what they had accomplished together. She spoke of the species who had stood side by side against impossible odds. She spoke of the future they had earned. The Dominion was not completely destroyed. Other fleets existed in other parts of the galaxy. The war would continue. But something had changed forever. The empire that had ruled through fear now knew what it was like to be afraid. Across the galaxy, oppressed peoples heard the news. Earth had survived. The Dominion had been broken. Hope spread like fire, igniting rebellions on 100 worlds. The aliens who built the Valiant had left behind a broken warship. They had hoped that someone would find it, restore it, and use it to continue their fight. They could never have imagined that the species who found it would do so much more. Humanity had taken that broken ship and made it into a symbol. They had gathered allies who had lost hope and shown them how to believe again. They had stood against tyranny and refused to fall. And now, as the sun rose over Earth on the first day of a new era, Admiral Grace Howard allowed herself to smile. The galaxy was not free yet, but it would be. Together, they would make sure of it. The Valiant flew on, carrying humanity's courage into the stars. The war for freedom continued, and nothing would ever be the same again. The end.